Hello, this is a presentation I gave about light and shade in October of 2014 at the Northwest Turfgrass Association conference in Washington. I often share the presentation slides, and ever since I gave this presentation, Jon Scott has been reminding me and requesting that I share some video or some kind of audio track that would go along with the slides. He often says it's a pity that he couldn't be there and he'd like to hear what I talked about and not only look at the slides. So I'm doing this as a favor to Jon Scott, and I hope that some other people will also find this useful, because this is the first presentation that he asked me to share, and because I promised him that I would do that, and that was about three and a half years ago. So I'm getting started with this one, and I intend in the future to record the audio track for some other presentations. Now, shade is a intractable problem sometimes. If there's not enough light, not enough photosynthetically active radiation, it's impossible to have good turf. However, there are some general things that or a checklist that one can go through and make sure that all of these have been considered or optimized to get the best conditions that one can possibly get when there is shade. So the first one is to look very carefully at species and cultivar selection. This is at the Manila Golf Club, and this photo was taken a few years ago when the greens were still seashore paspalum. However, the greens up against those condominium towers, which are over 40 stories high, they often those are to the east of the golf course, so they often won't get direct sunlight until late in the morning, until almost noon. And that just wasn't enough light for seashore paspalum. However, the golf course superintendent, Bob Horan, did a number of studies and tested different species, different cultivars on the greens that were closest to those towers, the greens that were most affected by the shade. And what you can see here in the foreground is a type of zoysia that can tolerate that shade. The three plots in the background that are brown, that have no leaves, those are three different Bermudas, and there just wasn't enough light for the Bermuda, and all the surrounding grass is seashore paspalum. It's clear in this case that the zoysia is outperforming the other grasses, and I was just back at this golf course about 10 days ago, and now 17 out of the 18 greens have been changed to zoysia, and they're performing well even in the shade. So if you can choose a more shade tolerant grass or a more shade tolerant cultivar, that's certainly an excellent option. Another thing one can do is remove the source of the shade. If there's no shade, then you've obviously solved your problem. This seminar was given at Chambers Bay, and I think that's an excellent example of a property that doesn't have a lot of shade. There's only a couple, I think, what was there? The one lone fir there, and any shade there comes actually from the mounds. I know the 10th green was sitting in between a couple of mounds, and during the winter the sun's so low that not much light was getting to that green. There may be some other shade issues related to mounding, but if this may not be realistic. It often won't be an option, but it's one of those things on the checklist that you can go through to see, can we remove the source of the shade? Another thing one can do is to increase the mowing height. As much as possible, one wants to increase the mowing height to allow grass to tolerate shade. Because if we think of mowing to me is like artificial shade, because when you mow the grass lower, you're cutting away the leaf material, and the leaf is like the photosynthetic engine of the plant. So you're taking away the ability of the plant to photosynthesize when you are cutting the grass shorter. And when you're taking the light away by shade, you're doing the exact same thing. When you're reducing the light, you're reducing the ability of the plant to photosynthesize. This is Tiffigal Bermuda grass on this slide in on Samui Island in Thailand, and the slightly higher collar cut around the green, one can see the Tiffigal is fine, and then as you get into the green, it's quite thin at a lower mowing height because the grass doesn't have enough light to grow. So the solution is, in this case, or if one wants to have grass instead of bare areas, increasing the mowing height is one way to do that. Another thing to do, because shaded turf is generally going to be less healthy, and there's generally going to be less air movement and higher humidity in shaded turf. So to optimize turf quality in shaded conditions, another thing on the checklist is to make sure that there's vigilant control of fungal diseases. This was at the Fort William Golf Course in Kolkata in eastern India. And it was amazing. This 18-hole property has 9 holes that are in and around a race course with absolutely no trees. And those greens completely free of disease. And then if you come into the other 9 holes, there's a lot of trees around and a lot of disease on this Bermuda grass, which is simply an environmental the reason that there's more disease in the shaded areas is an environmental reason, because it's the same grass, the same climate. The only difference really is the shade. Another thing on the checklist, traffic management. This is a walk-off area on a par 3 at Delhi Golf Club. And because it's shaded, there's a tree. I'm standing with my back to a very large tree. That tree overhangs the green. In this case, we don't see the shade on the green, but at many times of the day there is shade. And we have a lot of traffic in that area, and the grass just isn't growing well enough. It's not strong enough to tolerate that traffic or to recover from that traffic. So one must be especially vigilant also, not only about diseases, but also about traffic management when there is a shade problem. This was a shocking amount of over application of nitrogen fertilizer on seashore paspalum turf in Hanoi. I saw this a few years ago, and the idea in shade is to make the grass grow as slowly as possible. And one way to do that is to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer. This makes a lot of sense if you think of the leaves as being photosynthetic machinery or a photosynthetic engine for the plant. If you match the amount of nitrogen to the amount of light that the grass receives, you're going to have a very healthy plant. But if you have a relatively low amount of light and a relatively high amount of nitrogen, you're going to both cause the grass to grow too fast and cause that photosynthetic engine to get removed from the plant faster than you want it to. And also you're going to make leaves that are too succulent, and you're just going to have an awful surface. So rather than keeping nitrogen fertilizer the same or increasing it when there's shade, what you want to do is reduce the nitrogen fertilizer and let the leaves stay on the plant as long as possible. If you think of the shade-tolerant grasses, for cool season grasses, fine fescues are some of the most shade tolerant. And one of the characteristics of fine fescue is it's a very slow growing grass compared to other grasses. The leaves stay on the plant for a long time. The nutrients that the plant takes up, the carbohydrates that the plant makes through photosynthesis, stay in the plant for a long time because the leaves do not extend as rapidly as they would with other grasses, and those carbohydrates and nutrients are not removed by mowing so much. If we think about the warm season grasses, one of the most shade tolerant warm season grasses is zoysia grass, and zoysia grass has the exact same characteristic in that it is slow growing, so the leaves are removed less from the plant. So by trying to match the characteristics of the most shade tolerant grasses, which one can do by reducing nitrogen fertilizer, one can improve the quality of turf that's grown in shade. That's an important thing on the checklist. And another one is exactly related to that, and that is using plant growth regulators. If one uses plant growth regulators, the grass is more shade tolerant. It especially improves the quality of turf that's grown in shade. This is a manila grass or Kori Zoysia matrella green at Kea Golf Club in Fukuoka. This is the par 4 fifth green, and this green is completely surrounded by pine trees. This view is to the southwest, I believe. And anyway, one will see shade here in the morning until 9 or 10 in the morning, and then the shade comes again in the afternoon as the sun moves to the west and goes behind those pine trees that you can see in the right of this photo. Using growth regulators, however, allows the leaves to stay on the plant for a longer time because one is removing less of the leaf material, removing less of the photosynthetic machinery, and that makes the grass perform better in shade. And a final thing that one can do, one can provide supplementary lighting. This is something that's common in sports stadiums, where the light that gets blocked by the roof or blocked by the stands can be supplemented by artificial light. This is less common on golf course turf. It's more common on sports turf, but this is an option that one can look at. And I know I've heard of some units that are being developed to be used on golf course turf. So this is pretty exciting. I think the LED technology is probably going to be revolutionary in this regard, but I haven't really seen any. How would we say? I haven't seen any that covers a really large area. But I've seen some LED units that cover some small areas, like goal mouths or something like that. So this is something that probably in the future we're going to see more of, both on sports fields and on golf course turf. So that's a checklist of 8 things that one can look at, and you might be saying, well, none of those solve my problem, which I think is a good thing to say, because shade is a really difficult problem to deal with, and you often cannot remove the source of shade. You sometimes you can't raise the mowing height any higher. You've already reduced the nitrogen rate. You're already applying growth regulators. You're still having problems. And that's where I want to talk a little bit about measuring light. This is something that's been revolutionary for me in my understanding of how grasses grow and how we can deal with shade problems. And it's something that only, when did I start? I started in 2012 to really start paying attention to this. And I got one of these Field Scout quantum light meters that measures the photosynthetic radiation at any time, and I started learning about this or teaching myself about it. I used to read scientific articles that talked about these units of photosynthetic light, like photosynthetic photon flux density, ppfd, and daily light integral, DLI, and I was kind of intimidated by those numbers, and I didn't know what a photon was or what a flux density was. And I've realized this is nothing to be scared of. In fact, the numbers are pretty simple. And I think that if one has a shade problem that can't be dealt with, then the thing to do is to learn about the light and then be able to measure it and communicate about it. And that's the only way I think that one can really, really optimize the conditions in a really difficult shade problem. So you can get a meter. This is one from Spectrum Technologies. It costs a couple $100, maybe $300, maybe $200. I'm not sure, but it measures the photosynthetic light. And photosynthetic light, I'm going to talk about three things. If you understand these three things about photosynthetic light, that's about all you need to know. So light that's in the wavelengths that plants can use is called photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR. And I think I didn't even look this up before I recorded this audio, but I think it's something like 400 to 720 or maybe 400 to 700 nanometers. It's similar in wavelength to visible light. So that's the light in the wavelengths that plants can use. That is called photosynthetically active radiation, PAR. So that's a quantity that we can measure in two different ways. We can measure it instantaneously, how much light there is in 1 second, and that's recorded as micromoles of photosynthetic light per square meter per second, and that's something called the ppfd. It's the photosynthetic photon flux density, and this goes anywhere from zero. It goes anywhere from zero. Zero happens at night when it's completely dark, or if I'm under a piece of plywood, it's zero. That's there's no photosynthetic light reaching the turf. And it goes up to a maximum of about 2,000 micromoles per square meter per second. And that's in midsummer, it's when the sun is at the highest in the sky at midday. So what we typically see is a curve that goes from about 0 at sunrise, and it goes to 1 and then 2 and then 3. It goes up to about 1,000 at 9 a.m. in the morning, up to about 2,000 at noon during the summer, and then it comes down and it goes to 0 again at sunset. Because this is measured per second, and because the units are from 0 up to a maximum of about 2,000 per second, and because there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes then in an hour, so you have 3,600 seconds in an hour. So at midday, if you've got 2,000 micromoles per second, that becomes a very big number when you start adding up all the seconds. So in 1 hour, you have 7.2 million micromoles per square meter per hour if you have full sun at midday in early summer. So you have 7.2 million, and then the next hour you have another 7.2 million. So we start getting really large numbers. So the daily light integral is the cumulative amount from sunrise to sunset. If you add all of those micromoles together and then divide it by 1 million, instead of micromoles, now we just have moles per square meter per day. And this goes from anywhere from about 2, 3, 4, or 5 moles per square meter per day on a really, really cloudy day, like during a typhoon or during a hurricane, when there's just very thick cloud cover. And then a sunny day in summer with no clouds will be about 60 to 65 moles per square meter per day. That's what you get on a clear sky day. But it's been really interesting for me, especially in Asia where it's quite cloudy, to study how the clouds block some of the photosynthetically active radiation. So this Field Scout meter now is measuring 1,024 micromoles of photosynthetic light, 1,024 photons of photosynthetic light per square meter per second at this time in Cebu in the central Philippines, and that's because the clouds are blocking about 50% of the photosynthetic light. At this time of day, normally the light would be about 2,000 or a maximum. However, because of the clouds, there's only about half of the available light. One can use these kind of meters to check the effect of clouds and also to check the effect of trees or building or mountains that are causing shade, whatever. And this is at sunset. This is I was on a ferry boat in the ocean, and the sun was setting, and I thought, well, this is pretty. I wonder what the light is. Even to my eyes, the light was relatively bright, but the photosynthetic light, the photosynthetic photon flux density here was only 10. So as the sun goes over the horizon, eventually that number's going to creep down to 9 and 8 and 7, and when there's no more light, it's going to be 0. And then if you add it together for the day, you get something like this. So I've calculated what it would be in Seattle, and this is from the first day of the year to the last day of the year, from January to January. So in Seattle, because the sun is to the south in the winter, and then in the summer the sun moves closer to Seattle, and the days are longer and the sun is higher overhead. So the light changes through the year, but if there were no clouds every day, then this is what the daily light integral would be in Seattle. In the winter, on a sunny day, it would be a little bit less than 20, and in the middle of summer, from or let's say from, what is that? It's about over July. So something June, July, August, it would be up around 60 moles of photosynthetic light per square meter per day. Of course, it's not a sunny day every day in Seattle. So I looked at the average sunshine hours in Seattle, and from that we can make an estimate of how much the clouds are affecting the light. So if we do that, this is the normal conditions in Seattle. So a normal condition in Seattle in the wintertime is only going to have a DLI of about 10. And in midsummer, the DLI gets just over 40, something about 45 or something, because there's sometimes a little bit of clouds. So that's what happens with the expected daily light integral going through the year. And one can apply this on a problem area or on a good area to actually go measure the shade and measure how much the light is being restricted by whatever's causing the shade. That might be clouds, that might be a building, that might be a tree. So the first thing to do, go measure the photosynthetic light in an open area with no tree or building shade. In this case, I was measuring this on a golf course in the Philippines, and when this meter reads 1, that means it's at a maximum. It's 2,000 or above, but it won't actually, in reality, you can't have much more than 2,000. So when this meter reads 1, that just means it's at 2,000, it's at a maximum. So then a cloud came over when I was measuring, and the light dropped all the way down to 765. So it went from 2,000 micromoles per square meter per second all the way down to 765. So that's from this difference, from the sunny area to the cloud shade area. Now I can record what the reduction is. So if we have 765 divided by 2,000, that is, we're essentially in 38.25% sunshine, or that is 61.75% shade. So that is, those clouds are blocking about 62% of the light. I think by understanding what the actual units of light are, one can do all kinds of things with these meters and start to quantify how much the shade is impacting the turf, and explain, look, this grass is never going to grow here because we have shade that's blocking so much of the light that it's impossible for the grass to grow. And I think our eyes, although the wavelengths of light The wavelengths of light that our eyes see are very similar to photosynthetic light. However, the intensity of the light that our eyes see is completely unrelated to the intensity that the plant sees. So for example, if I'm in a bright room, I often have talked about this when I'm giving the seminar. I'll pull out the meter, which I've sometimes carried around in my bag, and sometimes we're in a well-lit seminar room or auditorium with bright lights above, and it can be quite bright, and I'll say, can anybody guess what the reading would be if I pull out this meter right now and measure it? And people invariably estimate way, way high. What our eyes see as bright light indoors, from those lights, we will only be recording about usually 7, 8, 9, 10 on a photosynthetic light meter, which is equivalent to night, basically. It's equivalent to nothing, which is why you don't really see plants growing indoors without a ceiling light, or what would that be called? Some kind of opening in the ceiling or some kind of window above to allow in the sunlight. The intensity of sunlight is so much higher than what we get from lights. It's a surprising thing to see when you pull out one of these meters and check it. So that's about all that there is. You can go through the checklist and make sure that you've done all of those things. If you do that, you're going to be optimizing the grass performance in shade. And there's not much else you can do other than studying what the photosynthetic light is, studying the effect of shade, measuring it, and then communicating about it better. I made a little handout web page, which you can find. It's still live. I checked it. So this is at seminar.asianturfgrass.com. 2014_NTA.html. You can find that handout, which has these slides embedded in it, and also has a few more links to information about light meters and about measuring these kinds of shade effects. So I hope you found this interesting, and good luck in dealing with shade problems. And I'll sign off now. Thank you very much.